According to a report released by Statista in June of 2020, over 675 million books were written and sold by authors who decided to go the self-publishing route. In 2018 alone, across Canada and the United States, Robin Leacock is an independent author and part-time teacher who just published his debut novel, Evolo, a young adult sci-fi story. He's in the process of navigating the self-publishing journey, and he joined me this week to pass along what he's learned along the way when it comes to self-publishing, the importance of teaching kids the value of literacy. He even took some time to divulge his love of sports and what's keeping him busy inside and outside of the classroom. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. So, Robin, if you're ready, I welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to learn all about your journey navigating self-publishing. Great to see you this afternoon, and happy Canadian Tuesday, buddy.
Yeah, you too, man. Let's get going. Let's do it.
So I know, Robin, that you are in the middle of navigating your self-publishing journey of your a new book called Evolo. So first of all, congratulations on writing the book and beginning the journey of self-publishing. So can you tell me all about your journey in the space of self-publishing and how's that going for you?
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, I guess I should start off by saying that I'm a teacher and that I've been a teacher for about 9 years now, mostly English and currently teaching middle school English. So reading and writing and literacy have always been a passion of mine, especially writing. But I never really gave it the time and the effort that was required. So a couple years ago, I moved to part-time teaching, so that I could focus a little bit more on my writing. And out of that came Evolo, which is my debut novel that I self-published earlier this year on Amazon. And in terms of the self-publishing journey, it's been interesting. I really came into it sort of naive and maybe a little bit clueless, but I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about self-publishing. And I know that sort of the lessons that I'm picking up right now are going to help me out a lot when I go to publish my next novel, for sure. A lot goes into building an audience, and so I'm really learning that right now.
Absolutely. Hosting a podcast is all about building an audience as well. So I can relate in that sense, buddy. So
yeah, that's right. Like, I mean, you're probably the perfect example, right? Like, you have this great podcast with great guests, and you record the podcast, but it's not enough to just post it somewhere and then hope that everyone's going to find it, right? Like, there's so much more work that goes into it that people don't see. And I think that is definitely the case for self-publishing as well.
Absolutely embrace the grunt work, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. It's a lot more grunt work, I think, than I was anticipating. But I'm learning to, like you said, embrace and enjoy the grunt work that comes with it, for sure.
Or to quote the Philadelphia 76ers, embrace the process, right?
Yeah, trust the process. You just have to trust the process and hope that everything is going to work out in the end.
Absolutely. And Robin, I'm curious to ask you about the tips you might have for anybody who who may be considering the journey of self-publishing?
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely not an expert on the topic, but I can sort of offer firsthand experience, which is that I didn't really think about what would go into self-publishing before you actually release the novel. So, I didn't do any pre-sale or any pre-order system. I didn't buy any online ads. I didn't do any giveaways. I essentially just published it on Amazon and then told people, hey, I wrote a book and here's where you can get it. And I think that that was good. And I have been able to build somewhat of an audience there. But I think that one tip that I would give is definitely put some time and effort into the pre-sale portion of self-publishing. Get the word out there before your book is actually available. Start to build interest. Maybe start a social media account. I have one now for Evolo. It's evolo.novel, but that was a few months down the line after the book was published. So I think that there's a lot of work that should go into it before you actually publish. And now I'm sort of experimenting with the things that I didn't experiment with before, like Goodreads giveaways and things like online ads and stuff like that. So just be ready for, like you said, grunt work. And also, I would say have a budget for things like beta readers and an editor and cover design, because you really want to put your best foot forward and put your best product out there. And sometimes to get quality, you have to spend a little bit of money, right? You have to invest in yourself and invest in your future to see results. So I would say maybe consider putting a budget aside for those things, and also get in contact with other independent authors that have done it before and that can give you a rundown of their experience, and they can give you their own tips and tricks on how to navigate this self-publishing world.
So let's talk about the book of
Sure.
Evolo. Tell me about it. Tell me about it. What's it about? I know it's a sci-fi story, but,
Yeah.
but tell me about it. And what was the motivation to write it, buddy?
Yeah, sure. So, Evolo, like you said, is a sci-fi novel. It's for young adults. I would say that the sweet spot is maybe 10 to 16 years old. Although I've had older readers read it and really enjoy it, which is very cool. It's basically a fictional imagining of the possible consequences of climate change and global warming. So it's not a book about climate change, but it uses climate change sort of as the background to tell the story of the two main characters. The two main characters are Fitz and Shay. They're two teenagers who were once best friends, but now they belong to different social classes. So they kind of have to, one, navigate their relationship that's always changing. And number two, the world is sort of preparing for its next phase to escape the effects of climate change. So they have to navigate all of that. It's a fast-paced read. There's a lot of adventure. I would call it a coming of age story for sure. So if you are, a parent or a young reader, or if you just enjoy young adult fiction or teen fiction, it's got that fast-paced nature, it's got that adventure, it's got that sci-fi element to it as well. So that's kind of like the overall picture of the book.
And Robin, tell me about your passion for writing. Obviously, as an English teacher, there's that direct correlation. But I'm curious, where else does your passion for writing come from?
Yeah, I think that when I was in high school, I was kind of the kid that was like good at a lot of things, but not great at any one thing. So I was always kind of like looking for, like you said, a passion. Everyone around me seemed to have like their thing, whether it was a specific sport or a subject in school that they were really good at, or playing an instrument. And I never had that one thing. But when I was in grade 10, I wrote a short story for an assignment and we presented it to the class. And I just remember that day really getting a good reaction from my classmates and my teachers. And I just love that idea of creating something that could entertain other people. And that kind of like lit the fire for sure. So I did a lot of writing in high school and in university. And then I thought that a really good way to encourage young people to read and write would be to become an English teacher. So, you know, above sort of the basic premises of education, I also like really make it my job to encourage kids to find a love for reading and find a love for writing for sure.
And let's dive in to your life as a teacher, because I'm also curious to ask you about how do you think we can encourage more kids to find a passion for literacy, reading, and writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I think about probably every day. And honestly, that's what I tried to do with Evolo, right? My students, my young students, were definitely like my ideal reader. I was trying to write a book that I said, you know, young people are going to like this. Young people are going to get interested in this. And if they're interested in this, then that might sort of spark their love for reading something else. So I think that the number one thing that we need to do is we need to find material that the students love. I think that as English teachers, sometimes and I think fellow English teachers might not agree with this, but I think we kind of get hung up on just teaching the classics, right? And I love the classics. I read the classics and I teach the classics and I love them so much, but those classics might not necessarily be in the wheelhouse of our current students. So it's finding something that they love. The best example that I can give is The Outsiders, which is a classic, obviously, but The Outsiders is a book that I've taught maybe 5 or 6 times, and I've never had a student that hasn't liked it. So once you introduce them to that, then you can start introducing them to books by the same author or stories in the same genre. So that's one way to go. The other thing that I try and do is I try and look beyond the scope of just, you know, the classic novel. You know, kids might be interested in certain nonfiction topics or a biography or an autobiography on a person that they like or that they admire. We can look at graphic novels. We can look at fan fiction. There's sort of this very, very broad scope of literature that's out there that we can present to kids so that kids don't just think that literature is like reading a thick novel from front to back. You know, there's other things that we can introduce them to. And I think that most kids are open to reading stories that they love. So I think we just have to find that material and make it accessible to them.
Absolutely. And, before this started, Robin, I told you that I had a deep appreciation for teachers, certainly more so now because of the pandemic. So I'm curious to ask you about how the last year and a half has been teaching during the pandemic, and what have you learned about yourself as a teacher?
Yeah, I think that more so than finding out something about myself, I've really found out a lot of things about my students. I found out about the importance of their mental health. Um, you know, me myself, my mental health took a hit during the pandemic, just doing the same thing over and over again every day for months. You know, here in Ontario, we were stay at home for a long time, and the schools have been closed for a large part of the pandemic. So a lot of it has just been Groundhog Day over and over again, teaching to a computer screen. And I have the tools to deal with this kind of adversity. Some students don't, right? So if my mental health is going to take a hit, imagine a 10, 11, 12, 13-year old who's dealing with this. So I really learned about the importance of in-person interaction for students and the importance of keeping their mental health where it needs to be. And I've also learned that kids are a lot more resilient than I think we give them credit for. I think that they've done a great job doing their best, doing the best that they can during the pandemic and during online learning. So yeah, I would say I learned more about them than I did about myself, but it's definitely been a challenging experience, but one that I think we're all going to end up growing from for sure.
And do you think we've learned anything during the pandemic that makes educating kids more efficient or easier as we transition back into the classroom full time?
Yeah, so if we're trying to look for sort of like silver linings or you know, we're trying to look at the bright side, right? Which is a good attitude to have. I think that students have definitely developed a lot of technological skills that they didn't have before. Educators have discovered um, technological tools that we didn't know about before that are very useful. And I think that maybe now students might have a better appreciation for that classroom time and that education time. So maybe um, it'll end up being, you know, not so bad in the end. There's also the idea that, you know, kids were forced to be independent learners to a certain extent. So hopefully that's something that we can carry over into in-person learning in the future for sure.
And I'm also curious to ask you about what have you been talking to or about with your fellow teachers about navigating this time as well.
Yeah, it's pretty much sort of the same attitude all across the board, which is obviously you want to get through the curriculum and you want to do the best you can to educate kids. But we've all kind of been talking about also the importance of students' mental health and that, you know, you really have to take into consideration that this is an extraordinary circumstance. And while you do um, want to evaluate them and make sure that they are at the level that they need to be at, there's nothing more important than a person's mental health. And so we've been talking a lot about that. And we've also been talking about ways to improve our own mental health. You know, like it's a two-way street and even a three-way street if you include the parents. So my message when I'm talking to other teachers and especially when I'm talking to my students, it's just we're all doing the best we can. We're all trying to work together to make this work. And now, luckily, we're starting to see sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, which will be very much welcomed.
And I'm also curious as we approach the summer months. I'm curious to get your thoughts on a message you may have for parents as we navigate the summer and making sure that kids don't lose the knowledge that they retain during the school year.
Yeah, so that's a tough one, right? Just because I guess we could say that the knowledge that they received this year may be a little bit sort of loose in their memory and maybe a little bit easier to jar from their memory. So I would say that it's important, number one, to treat the break really as a break. Students, parents, teachers haven't really gotten a break in any way, shape, or form. So it's important that the students get a break. But herein lies sort of the importance of something that we were talking about before, like reading, like writing, right? Like if you can find your kid a good book or a couple of good books for the summer that will take them away from the PS5 or the iPad or whatever, that is one way that you can keep a kid's mind sharp through the summer. And that way we'll all be ready to get going again in September.
And Robin, I'm curious if there's one lesson you could go back 10 years ago and tell your younger self about something you've learned about yourself now, what would that be and why?
Oh, that's a good question. So 10 years ago, I would have been 24, finishing university and on my way to teachers college to become a teacher. Um, I don't know. I think I maybe would tell myself to uh, maybe reevaluate what's important in my life. I think when I was young, it was all about how much money I was going to make and how many friends I had and how many parties I was invited to. And now, as I get older, I start to realize that it's more about how you feel about yourself as opposed to how others feel about you. So yeah, maybe I would tell myself to sort of reevaluate my priorities and put a little bit more effort into creating good writing, as opposed to I don't know if it was a waste of time, but maybe you could say waste my time partying and chasing money and doing all that stuff. I would just tell myself to reevaluate what's important to you.
Every experience is a growth experience,
That's
right?
right.
There you go. And I'm also curious to ask you about what's the best part for you about being Canadian, buddy?
Oh yeah. The best part about being Canadian, other than the free healthcare, I I love, my favorite food is poutine. I love poutine so much. It's like so I lived in Quebec for a couple years when I was younger, and that's where I really like ate the good poutine. So now that I'm back living in Ontario, I'm kind of like constantly on the search for a poutine that matches what I ate back when I lived in Quebec. So for people who don't know what poutine is, I guess I should explain. It's basically just fries with cheese, preferably cheese curds and gravy, and I think it's the greatest food in the world. And people try and mess it up, by adding like meat and vegetables and sour cream and all that stuff. But I'm not about that. I'm a classic poutine guy. Just the fries, just the cheese, just the gravy. So when I think Canada, Canadian, that's the first thing that pops into my head. So I'll say poutine is the best thing about being Canadian.
And I know that you're a huge sports fan. So what's keeping you busy in the realm of watching sports these days, buddy?
Yeah, I guess I'll go local. Um, and I'll say the Toronto Blue Jays. They have a really great young team. They're a really exciting team to watch. They're not perfect. They have a lot of flaws. Their pitching, some of their pitching is not very good. Their bullpen's not very good, but they have a lot of great young players. They have Vladdy Guerrero Jr., who's probably one of, if not the best hitter in baseball right now. So he's really fun to watch. And this Jays team has really like made me fall back in love with baseball. So I would say the Jays, and obviously I have my eye on the NBA playoffs. I think we're going to get a really interesting champion now that the Nets and the Lakers are gone. And some hockey here and there. There was the U.S. Open this weekend, so I'm always watching. I'm watching everything, but I would say that my main focus right now is on the Jays for sure.
And since you're in Toronto now, buddy, I'm curious if you've dived into your opinion on how to fix the Maple Leafs at all.
Oh my God, that's a whole yeah. How much time do you have?
That
So
could be a whole nother podcast.
that's
But
right.
go
So
ahead.
so I'm not necessarily a Leafs fan. In fact, growing up, I really like I was just surrounded by Leafs fans, and I think that that's why I didn't like them when I was young. But now, as I'm older, I have a lot of friends that are Leafs fans, and like I kind of root for them because I want to be happy for my friends for if their team wins. And I thought that they were sort of on the way to fixing their issues, but I just think that they have the same issue that my favorite team has. So I'm a New York Rangers fan, and I think that both teams are very similar in the sense that they are both very top heavy. So they have one extraordinary line, one good line, and then the rest of their players are just like, so. And I think that what the playoffs this year are teaching us with the four teams that are left is that, yeah, having a superstar helps, but I think you have to have a balanced lineup. Like it's more about having experience and speed and grit. And it's not so much about just loading up on like skilled players at the top of your lineup. I think that you have to be balanced. And I think that that's something that the Leafs will have to fix. I don't know how they fix that because they have all these guys now and all these contracts, so they might have to go the long way to be able to fix it. But yeah, I thought that maybe they had a shot this year, but then they kind of got exposed in the playoffs. So now everybody's sort of rethinking their opinion on the Leafs for sure.
Yeah, I think this is like the seventh straight year that they've lost in the first round of the playoffs. So there may be something systemic there as well. So
Yeah, it's rough. And like I said, I know a lot of Leafs fans, and yeah, they're going through it for sure. They're living through some tough times as fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious to ask you, Robin, if you've given any thoughts to whether it be as an educator or as a person. How do you want your personal legacy to be defined?
Yeah, this is gonna get this is kind of getting very deep. But when I made the decision to move from full-time to part-time teacher, a big part of it was that idea of like a legacy, and just like, what will you be remembered for, and what mark will you leave on the world. And I think that part of a legacy that I want to leave is being a great teacher and being a great educator. I have a lot of teachers that I'm still in contact with to this day, that I love and appreciate, and I'm so thankful for what they did for me. So I would love to be that for a student. But I also want to create things, create stories that I can put out there that can influence young people to get into reading and writing. That I think right now is my number one legacy that I want to leave. Is I want to create and write stories that will encourage young people and open up their eyes to the importance of reading and writing. I think that the world needs more artists, man. I think that it's important that we not forget about the importance of art. So I would love to have a legacy that sort of goes in that direction.
As a journalist, buddy, I agree with you. I think the arts are a wave into the future, and I want to see more investment into that as well. But my final question for you is, if people want to get connected with you or buy the book, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, sure. So the best place to find the book is on Amazon. It's up there for $10 for a paperback copy. So, reasonable price. And if you're subscribed to Kindle Unlimited, then you can read it for free. And if you want to keep up with me and upcoming projects that I'm working on, I have a website. It's robinleacock.com. That's Leacock. You can follow me on Instagram at Robin Leacock, and the book has an Instagram account as well. It's at evolo.novel. So EVOLO.NOVEL. And those are all the ways that you can connect with me.
Hey, fantastic. I think we're also connected on Instagram personally, so I look forward to following your progress, buddy. But for now, I want to thank you for joining me and sharing your passion about reading, writing, and independent authoring, and for joining me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
I appreciate it so much, Kevin. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to maybe talking again in the future.